Hello, my name is Dave Bartholomew, and I'm with the Office of Collaboration Dispute Resolution at the State of Minnesota. Welcome to our presentation on Bridging Divides. This presentation is a partnership with the Association of Minnesota Counties, the League of Minnesota Cities, the Association of Minnesota Townships, and the Minnesota School Board Association. And it's all being put together here at the tremendous offices and studios of Sourcewell in Staples, Minnesota. There's two parts to this series, two about 50-minute parts. So please watch them both. And at the end of the day, if there's anything our office can do, let us know. Our contact information is part of this. We also have a handbook, so make sure you check out the handbook. So please enjoy the presentation, and thanks again to Sourcewell for being such a great partner. Hello, and welcome back to the second half of our program today. I want to recover a little bit of what happened the first half. We talked about kind of the understanding, the base of conflict, what goes on. We talked about developing a problem-solving mindset and how important that is. And we started getting into this interest-based problem-solving a bit, and that's a real important feature. So if we go back to our screen right now, we can kind of see that interest-based problem-solving is really this understanding that people come in with their positions. Either they're for or against something, okay? And that what we need to do is identify the underlying interests, the things that are going on down below. So they say they're for or against something, that's fine. Why? Why are you for or against something? What's going on? And so then once you get those underlying interests identified, then you're going to your options. So if you identify these things, what kind of options could work? And those would be, the options would be ones that work for you and that also include some pieces from other folks, right? So it's not just things that work for you. You have to include some of their needs as well. And then you try to integrate that together so that you have some of their interests, some of their needs, your needs. You kind of put it together for a better, more durable package, okay? So now we're going to go on to our next piece, which is the emotions and identity. So emotions and identity are things that happen, and we always try to seem sometimes to push them out of the picture, and we need to deal with them. Because the truth is that a lot of times differences of opinion, they don't turn into conflict, okay? So for example, you can work out if I want to spend a vacation on the beach and my wife wants to spend in the mountains, after a few arguments, we could decide to go to Hawaii, where they have both of them. Or we could go to the Caribbean this year for the beach, and we go to Colorado next year. We can work that out. This is the stuff that happens all day long in our lives. However, when a difference of opinion turns into a conflict, especially ones that are tough and difficult, it's almost true, always true, that the difference has gotten to be some strong emotions are in the way. And emotions are happening in their life, and that's what's going on. And so let's take a little bit of a different and harder look at that. Again, a lot of this in our handbook, so you can follow along on that as well. So one of the keys in all this is managing high emotions. So in their book called Dealing with an Angry Public, which according to the poll earlier on seems like an interesting topic for all of us, the authors note that people can get emotional or angry in three specific types of situations. When people have been hurt, when people feel threatened, and when people believe their fundamental beliefs are being challenged, right? These are the kind of things that make it come from just a regular disagreement to, something's really big and now they're emotional and now they're angry. And that anger can be intensified, which I would argue is kind of what we're starting to see at our public meetings, when people feel weak or powerless in the face of others who have power. And I think about how few times people ever come to a school board meeting, a city council meeting, a county board meeting, a township board meeting. So they look at this thing and they think they feel weak or kind of powerless. That anger can get intensified when they think they've been treated unfairly. They've been treated disrespectfully or dishonestly. Or sometimes they can get angry and get intensified when it's a helpful way of rallying the troops. And boy, have I seen that happen in a lot of public meetings where somebody stands up and they're just trying to rally the rest of the folks in the audience to demonstrate they're in charge and everything else, and sometimes bullying people to accept their views. So these are the kind of things that really get that anger going. And so the question is how do you deal with that? Okay? And, they recommend a strategy that focuses on building and maintaining a long-term relationship of trust. Remember, this is all about trust. And the long term is because today you got this battle, tomorrow you might need to work on something together. And so you've got to have a path here that just doesn't go day by day, fight by fight. You need to have a longer view, and you got to build that trust between your organization, county, city, whatever it might be, and the community you serve. And doing that involves being willing to share information. And we see quite a bit of that now. We have a lot of transparency. So we're sharing quite a bit of information these days, but we have to make sure it's shared in a way that people understand it, not just a 75-page report dropped on the table. We need to be willing to listen to people's concerns. And this is a toughest one for us because we may have a public comment section or something of a meeting, but it's 2 or 3 minutes. The cameras are rolling. People are starting to think it's showtime. We need a better way to listen to those concerns. It may be after the meeting. It may be kind of having a cup of coffee. And we need to be willing to learn what steps might need to be taken to address those concerns. Instead of just saying, no, I'm sorry, this is it. It's my way or the highway. We need to try to figure out what do they need, and is there any way we can kind of start to pull this together so that they believe that their concerns have been addressed. They may not have gotten everything they wanted, but they've been addressed, and that's really important. When we start talking about emotion, again, I'm going to mention lots of material in the handbook about this. There's a whole set of pieces here. We want to be able to express emotion. A lot of times, because we think of emotions as kind of challenging and kind of, oh, geez, I don't want to go there, we kind of put them off. And the truth is that they really probably should be part of the issue. We need to acknowledge that. Whether it's our emotions, why do we get so upset? Why do we feel so threatened? The fact that people don't listen to us or don't take our advice? Or whether it's their view. What is it that's going on here? What emotions are out there? You have to learn to unbundle them. In a conflict, there's a bunch of emotions going on in their mind, in your mind, and they're all kind of wrapped together, and we have to be able to kind of pull those apart and figure out, why am I upset about this? What's going on? You can just start to feel your fight or flight thing. You hear somebody comes to a public presentation, starts talking and saying things that you don't believe to be true or that are really hurtful, and you can just feel your blood pressure going up, and you can feel yourself getting worked up. And we need to be able to acknowledge, hey, hold it here. I can feel like I'm getting, really worked up. I'm getting angry about this. Stay cool, stay calm. We talk about exploring your own emotional footprint. We've all had experiences and things happen in our life that make us the way we are. We need to separate our feelings from judgments, Yeah, and sometimes there's people saying things, like I have a comment here, exactly right. Just rip the Band-Aid off. Just do it. Put yourself out there. Be a little vulnerable. If you've never seen anything on vulnerability, watch the 15-minute Brene Brown TED Talk. So just Google Brene Brown TED Talk, and you'll see 15 minutes of why it's so valuable to just sort of put yourself out there. Negotiate with your feelings. A lot of times, people need to have things acknowledged. Acknowledge those feelings then. These are the kind of things you can do so that you can move on. Again, a lot more information about this in the handbook, and this is really important stuff. Another piece is identity. Okay, identity is about this idea of who you believe yourself to be or not be. So I think of myself as somebody who's authentic or fair or this or that, and that's how people have these identities. It's a story we tell about ourselves. It's our sense of who we are in the world, right? And so this is important because people have identities at kind of a personal level, their different attitudes they have, their values, their religion. People have professional roles. I'm a mayor, I'm a manager of this, I do that. We have all these identities kind of packed into ourselves. And what we're trying to make sure we understand is, who are we saying we are, and how does that impact the relationships and the stories that we're telling ourselves and the way we behave with other people? Okay? Because if that sense of identity becomes threatened, then that can really add fuel to the conflict. And it makes the conflict much more challenging and much more difficult to resolve. So, for example, if a manager is going to give me some, feedback about some poor performance, sometimes I feel, that my identity of being a hard worker or a valued work employee or whatever, all that feels threatened. And all of a sudden, that causes some more additional conflict. So that's one of the challenges. When we look at core identities, we have this example. People need to feel that they're competent, that they're a good person, that they're a person worthy of love. And the challenge gets to be is if that's kind of threatened, then we really become difficult to work with and stuff, and it adds a whole other layer to a conflict that's already too challenging. So when we work with identity issues, keep in mind to reflect on what kind of identity issues might be at play for me. And then what might they be for the person who's in this conflict with me? And are we willing maybe to discuss those and stuff? So again, go to the handbook for a lot more information about identity. But emotion and identity, like I say, a lot of times you like to push those out. Let's just focus on the facts of this problem. Well, you know what? Life isn't that simple. So when that doesn't work for you, when you say, let's just focus on the facts, I don't care about the rest of this, I'm telling you that you're making the challenge much more difficult, and you're making that conflict much harder to fix. So let's recap some of these pieces of emotion identity. First off, emotions play a big role in most conflict. They really do. And high emotions, when people are angry and very emotional, they really require good listening. And I'm going to say in a few minutes that I don't believe listening is a skill we have a real strength in here in the Midwest. We don't tend to listen very well. Of course, I'll admit that's for me personal. So, we need to have good listeners. We need to be very careful of our responses and everything else. So next is people have identities. People have identities of who they are and how they need to understand how those fit into people's interests. So just remember that these emotions and identities are all tied into all of us. Try to recognize your own emotions, your own identities that are at play here. If you feel threatened, if you're used to being in charge and all of a sudden somebody's kind of saying, well, I don't think you know all the answers or whatever, you may feel like, hold it, I'm in charge here. We need to work through that, And then one of the questions that asked was, how do you recommend doing some of this if you're meeting online? Well, meeting online adds a whole nother level of complexity, right? Because one of the challenges is you don't maybe see the same sort of interaction. You don't see that same sort of notices of posture or whatever. So that's an excellent point. I would say first off, go slow, because while you may be taking things for granted in a meeting, in an online meeting, you have to slow down a bit. You probably need to ask a few more clarifying questions. I can tell that this is something, for example, that really bothers you. Can you tell me a little more about why? I know that you can see this is really impacting you. Help me learn a little bit. Because a lot of this is about saying, help me. I don't understand everything. I need to understand your perspective. So if you could just take a minute maybe and help me understand. And it's not terms like why this small thing is such a big deal to you. That doesn't help, right? So it's like, listen, if you want to just be open and honest and vulnerable and just say, you know what, I'm afraid I don't understand everything that's going on here. It's clearly impacting people more than I originally thought it did. So if I could ask, could you help me to learn a little more? Could you help me to figure out, why? So could you tell me a story of why this is so important to you? So that idea of just sort of putting yourself out there, I think that's very, very important. And again, like I say, check out Brene Brown for the best of that. She has some excellent books too. Okay. This is part of what we've been getting some of the chat questions about, is this whole idea of communicating. How do you do it, especially in these challenging times? So one thing I'm going to point out is that listening is still, the most important skill. This is something I bet you I've said 100 times over the last couple months. Listen to learn, not to respond. We play this game of life like it's some show where you say this and I say, no, that's not true. And then you say something and I'm already listening. So I respond back and forth, like as if it's some sort of a Perry Mason trial show or something here. No, no, no. We're not trying to play gotcha. We're not trying to be witty and quick. We're listening to learn, okay? And if we could, what we'd like to do is to be able to say, you know what? Let's try to figure out what's going on here. Let's not be so quick for responding. Instead, let's go for the idea of listening to learn. So first, you need to listen. Then you need to learn. And only then can you lead. I do a lot of work in leadership development, and this came across my world a couple weeks ago, and I just love it. This idea that first you need to really listen, and really listen. Find out what's going on. And then you need to learn, because we're all in learning mode here. We don't know everything. And when you've done that, first off, people will see that, and they will reflect on that, and they'll say, the truth is that, he listened to me. She listened. She asked good questions. And, at the end of the day, maybe we didn't agree on the solution, or our viewpoints didn't line up, but I got the sense that they cared. I got the sense that they wanted to learn a little more. And really, pretty much that's all I can ask out of my elected official. That's all I can ask out of my staff. And so I think there's a lot going on here that we need to keep in mind at a kind of core human level. And of course, listen beyond the words for the heart of the message. People use body language, they use our tone of voice, your own things that are going on in your head. Try to pay a little more attention to that. Instead of just being quick with responses and trying to play gotcha, slow yourself down a little bit. I'll say it again, which I said earlier. You really don't have much control over the other person. You don't know how they're going to respond. You can't game your way through this. So what you want to do is what you can do. And what you can do is listen better, try to learn, try to understand their perspective, try to talk back with them like, okay, so it sounds to me like you're really worried about the tax level. Sounds to me like you're really worried about the impact of this on at-risk kids. It sounds to me like that, you just have that conversation back and forth. I'm trying to understand where you're coming from. Because that, you will learn things here. Right? And that is just an amazing experience when it happens. Because the truth is, you may have come into that conversation thinking this was going to be a drag, that you have nothing to learn from this person, that they're not very bright, and you already know what they think, and you disagree, so this conversation's over. I'm suggesting, if you want to put on a bit of a leadership hat, if you want to help us work through these polarized times, that this is on you. You can do this. You can rise up to this challenge, and you can be the one who listens better. They may not. As Jack mentioned earlier, they may not have learned these skills. They may not have taken this course. You're just doing the best you can do. That's what you're worrying about, is your personal development and doing the best job you can do. And remembering that listening is really the world's most powerful skill. It's a basic human need for people to want to be heard. And if we've seen anything in elections over the last handful of years, it's that people do not feel they're being listened to. They're not being heard. And we know it sometimes is true. We know sometimes we have a view or an opinion or a position, and we're pushing it through. And what we need to do is understand that, we need to listen better. If we listen to people, it really helps to de-escalate the situations. It doesn't help when somebody's hollering at you and then you holler back and then they holler, then you holler and they holler. It just keeps going up and up like this. That's not what we're looking for. That's not going to solve any problems. Instead, we want to listen. And when they're hollering, you're just, okay, great. I can tell you're really upset about this, and so help me learn. What is it that bothers you? Well, nobody listens. Okay, I'm listening right now. So tell me what you're worried about with the school or with this program or that program. And really, that's what we can do. We may or may not be able to solve all their problems, but we can sure do a better job of listening and acting as if we really care, right, by listening good. So that's the key to this, is really being empathetic and really listening and opening yourself up to be kind of curious. Is there something here I can learn? Is there something here I don't know? So you're practicing your listening. Sometimes you're listening for needs. You see a group of them listed here. You know that you have compassion and community. They're talking about the family needs, some sort of sense of justice and everything. So that's important. You're listening for needs. You're listening for feelings. People that feel anxious, they're shocked, they're lonely, they're worried. There's a lot of things that are going on here, and these are feeding into all of your sort of responses. And so our goal is to say, okay, as we are listening, be looking out for these things. Do they seem anxious? Okay, great. You feel anxious to me. Can you tell me a little bit of why you're anxious? Well, I'm worried I'm going to lose my job, and if I lose my job, I won't be able to pay for this assessment. So I don't want the street project because I'm very nervous about my own future. Okay, well, maybe we have a program where you can slide some payments or something. Maybe we don't. You may not be able to solve the problem. I've been in that situation too many times where even when you listen to somebody and you understand their problem, you're saying, I'm sorry. We're going to do this street. It's time. And I know it's going to be difficult for you, and I really hope things work out. And then you try to go home and get to sleep, because you can't be saying yes to everything. Sometimes the answers you're bringing aren't very helpful. And then listening for identities. You can hear somebody talking about the concerns they have, and it's because they're a father or a mother. They're coming from a place of being a senior or a person of color, and you may not be able to relate. You just can't go there. You've never been there. You don't know that. So then you're asking questions. So how does this impact you? Tell me why. What's going on? And trying to get that pulled out a bit so that you can have that better, deeper conversation where they really feel like they've been heard. Another skill in communications is speaking to reduce defensiveness. We do that a lot, right? Where we really, really feel defensive all the time, it seems like. And so in that case, what you need to do is, talk more about yourself and a little less about the other person. Talk more about what you're feeling, what you need, what you want, and your contribution to the conflict. So for example, if I'm at work and we're in the cube farms of the old days, maybe we're not going to have cube farms in the future, I don't know, but in cubes, and I share a cube with somebody, share this office space, and their side is always a mess. It's just a mess. It's horrible. I try to keep my side neat. Now, if I go into a conversation with them to talk about this at some point, I could say to them, you're such a slob. You never take care of your area. There's going to be a fire in your half someday. I can't believe it. Well, how well do you think that's going to go? It's not going to go well at all, right? And it's not going to get the problem resolved. So if instead you go in and you say, I just want to talk to you a little bit about our office space here. I grew up with my parents and my family. My dad in the garage, he had a spot for every tool, and every tool was in exactly the right place. My mom was very organized. The laundry was done like this. When we cooked, when we did this, when she did this, we designed a new room. Everything in my house was thoughtful, organized. That's the way so I grew up in this really organized world. And so it's really tough for me to be able to work in this environment because I'm used to such a different environment. And it's a problem for me. So I'm just telling you, it's kind of my problem, right? Now the other person then may listen to that and say, geez, I didn't know it bothered you that way. That's not the kind of house I grew up in. Feel bad for you maybe. But the truth is that maybe I can clean it up a little bit. Or maybe we should put a screen between us. All of a sudden the idea when you say this is my problem, I'm trying to figure out how to deal with it, they may reach out. People often respond the way you give it to them. So if you're angry, they'll be angry. If they come in angry and you're kind of cool and you're saying, okay, well, help me learn a bit more about this, sometimes that can help to de-escalate them. And not kind of blaming and not kind of saying, you're this, you're that. It's more about you. So sometimes that can help too when you get to that point. Let's recap some of these communication skills. And of course, there's a lot of communication tools out there. First off, you really want to improve your listening. And the beauty of listening is you can practice that. You can practice it listening to the radio on the way home, to some talk show. You can improve your listening and listening for things like, feelings and needs and identities. You can be listening to learn, not to respond. You can talk less about the other person and their mistakes and what they intended, and talk a little more from your own perspective, because you don't really know what their intent was. You think they're just doing it to mess with you, but you don't really know that. So you do that. Using some I statements. You know, when I see this, when I feel this, I get like this, instead of saying you don't care, you're a slob, whatever. And being a little less defensive. We all seem to go there right away. We're living in an attack time. And when people say something, we all feel like we're always on the defensive right away. And what we need to start thinking is, hold it here, hold it here. What's going on? What's happening? What don't I understand? Again, keep in mind, if you have any questions, to please put them in the chat as we go through it. Now I want to get to one of the topics that I think might be very, very helpful to you. And that's a topic we called reframing. This is about somebody kind of coming in. I always think of a public meeting as a good example, where somebody throws out some nasty, out-of-line comments. You know, you don't care about kids. You're just a big spending liberal. You're just this way. You're that way. All these kind of things that come at you. Clearly kind of an attack thing. Nasty, totally out of line. So the question is, when that comes, how do you respond? And of course, you know what what you'd like to say, and then you know what you can't really say that maybe, and you know that it just doesn't help anyway to go down that road and get into a fight. So the thing we're going to talk about reframing, and the thing to remember is that in the middle of a contentious kind of a debate, of an argument here, that people really hold passionate viewpoints. They're very passionate. Whether it's a health issue, whether it's some sort of a quality of life in the community issue, whether it's a tax and spend issue, people are very passionate about things. And when they get passionate, that can lead them then to say some unproductive, kind of nasty things, right? And so we need to think about, how do we respond to that? And so in this reframing, these principles are that every strong statement, some angry, some really strong statement, it contains some underlying interest or concern. So again, we're going to do the same thing we've talked about all day. We're going to peel that back and say, okay, why are they so upset about this? What's going on? Secondly, they really want a constructive response. They're putting stuff out that isn't constructive at all, but they really do want to have a constructive response to their statement. Okay, and people can switch to more constructive kind of discussions instead of hollering or blaming, whatever. They can switch to that if they believe that their needs or concerns are being dealt with. So now we're back to that listening again, and sometimes paraphrasing back to them. So it sounds to me like you're concerned about this and that. So what we're going to do is talk about this reframing and the steps. So the first step of reframing is to listen hard. If I've said listen 10 times or 20 times today already, right? But listen hard. Try to figure out what's going on, ask good questions. You want to identify those underlying interests, to figure out what it is that's going on. You know they're angry, you know they're against this project. Why? What's happening here? Because you may not be able to deal with the plain, I just don't like this project. It may be that this project is going to go anyway, okay? They're mad about it, but for the broader community, for the broader state, it's a good thing to do. But now what we need to do is understand what are their interests, because maybe we can kind of meet some of those. Next thing in reframing is you start removing some of the problem language, the swear words, the anger. You start getting rid of some of that when you talk back and talk to them. You get rid of that. In paraphrasing, you're going to paraphrase your statement back to them. We're going to have examples of that in just a second. And then finally, you stick with it. One of the things interesting about reframing, if somebody comes in and says something nasty to you, and you respond, okay, so it sounds like you're worried about taxes. And if that's wrong, they'll tell you. They'll say, it's not about taxes. Weren't you listening? I'm really upset about this. Okay, so you can stick with it, and you can make sure you get down to the nitty-gritty of what it is that they're worried about. Again, lots of stuff on this in the handbook. I think it starts on page 23. So here's an example. Okay, this is a made-up example about housing. So there is an increasing need for affordable housing all across the state of Minnesota. There are many ideas why housing is so expensive in Minnesota, because of the tough weather, maybe because of the amount of regulations we have. So there's many reasons why some people believe building affordable housing is imperative. You got to do it. While others get anxious about affordable housing being built in their neighborhood. Okay? So you can imagine you're having a public meeting now about this, and somebody stands up and says, you know, affordable housing will bring in people who don't contribute to the tax base and who will be a drain on our community. Okay? So the question is, you know, what would you say back to that, right? And of course, the truth is that we've got some examples in our handbook. You could say, okay, so it sounds to me like your concern is about, you know, making sure our tax base stays solid. This idea about people who will be a drain on our community, I mean, that's just some nasty language, right? So we can go back to this thing of the tax base thing. Here's some more examples. Those tenants will be irresponsible and destructive. Okay, kind of a classic sort of statement you probably have heard. You know, when you reframe that, you could say, okay, so it sounds like it's important to you the property is kept in good condition. Is that what you're saying? They'll say, yeah, because it'll get run down. Well, you know what? When it comes to the property, we can maybe make some rules in there that it has to be maintained at a certain level and things like that for this new housing project. We all want to look good. We don't want it getting beat up and torn down. So, you know, we could probably work that out. But not if we just say, you know, they will not be irresponsible and destructive. Yes, they will. No, they won't. Yes, they will. No, they won't. You know, and there's a lot of times there's underlying things going on in here, right? We had a housing project in my community many years ago, and I was on the council, and this woman comes up and says, you know, that you put in this affordable housing project, it's going to bring in those kind of people. So I think I knew where she was going, and it wasn't nice or polite. And I said, those kind of people? What kind of people? Well, you know what I mean. No, I don't. I'd like you to explain to me what you mean by those kind of people. She got in a huff and left the room. In the end, we built the housing project, and it's been great. And there hasn't been all these problems. But people will say things like that are so nasty or so mean, and it just floors you. You're trying to think of what's going on here. Somebody might stand up at this meeting and say, if you won't agree to build 500 affordable housing units, we'll know you don't care about people who have less opportunity than you do. Okay? And, you know, it might, maybe a reframing might be, it sounds like the change won't seem to be meaningful unless it's a big number. Well, maybe it's not 500. Maybe it's 400 or 300. But the point is that you want a meaningful commitment. It's not 10. Okay, it's something bigger. But you're talking about that. Because this person's going to say, well, it means you don't care about people. Well, throw that aside. That's, you know, what are you going to start arguing? Yes, I care. No, you don't. Yes, I do. It's just not going to work. You know, somebody might stand up and say, this city is going to go broke. If we do this kind of housing project with the amount of city dollars in it, we're going to be going broke. Well, and of course, you've probably run the numbers. You know the city's not going to go broke, quote unquote. But you might respond by saying, okay, so it sounds to me like ensuring the tax base isn't reduced. That's kind of the key to you, right? So when this comes in, this can't like lower the value of homes around it or things like that. You want that tax base to be solid. Okay, great. Well, we can maybe run some numbers and talk to some other cities that have done affordable housing projects like this in a neighborhood, and we can find out what happens and we can work on that, you know? So when you get to reframing, there are some quick tips here of how you respond. First off, I think the most important thing maybe of all is to stay professional. Stay cool. Don't take this personally. You may feel, and it may be intended as a very personal attack, but that's not the way to take it. You want to stay cool. Somebody in the room's got to stay cool. It's clearly not the other folks, so that leaves it up to you. So try your best, right? And get some help sometimes if you need it from some of your colleagues. Next thing to do when you're thinking about reframing is to, you know, ask some clarifying questions. You know, so I don't understand, you know, what do you mean by that? You know, kind of like mine. What do you mean those kind of people? You know, I knew what she meant, but I wanted her to say it out loud, and she wouldn't, of course. But try to learn a little bit more about their concern. And this is the famous 3 words again, tell me more. And I understand that when you're in this tough public meeting, as somebody's up hollering, the idea of saying to them, could you tell me a little more? It seems kind of counterintuitive. You would rather they just go away, right? But the truth is that you really do want to learn a little more. I can tell you're upset. I know this bothers you, so tell me a little more about why you think this is such a bad idea, or what you mean about the property tax levels or whatever, because I'm just trying to learn here. I'm trying to grow. So if you've got some questions, maybe we haven't thought of them, and maybe we should look them up before we go forward. So tell me a little more. Show some empathy. You got to remember that these people, in many cases, they just want to be heard. They're often very nervous about being at a public meeting anyway. They're probably even more nervous about being on camera. And their neighbors are watching them, and so everybody's all worked up and shook up. And so one of the things I think that you want to do is really show empathy. I know this is really hard for your neighborhood. I appreciate that. I don't live in the neighborhood, but I know from talking to a lot of people that this is a challenging topic in the neighborhood. So I want to know I want you to tell me a little more if you can about why. I want to understand. We really want to know their story. And what if all this doesn't seem to work? It really would be helpful, right? And so what if it all doesn't work? What do we do then? Well, we go on to remembering that safety comes first, okay? And so if this is getting out of hand, remember these things can kind of flow fast. So you're always trying to kind of keep a lid and watch things and listen and learn. Okay to have some emotion, that's good. That's, letting some steam off, that's all good. But always keeping a handle on it and keeping an eye on that part, the safety part of it. Always remember that sometimes people get flooded and they can't be reasoned with at the moment. And this is really important. There's a whole bunch of brain research that shows now that what happens is people get triggered and they get upset, and then what happens is they get so angry that in a sense their brain and they just get flooded. And you can start talking logic to them. You can answer a question with statistics or dollar amounts or something, and it's just going right by them because they've flooded. Like I used to say, it's like the old days with carburetors in a car. You pump it too many times, the car gets flooded, it can't start. You gotta wait for that stuff to clear out. There's excellent topics on this. If you Google this idea of people with brains getting flooded. So the truth is they can't have the conversation you want to have with them. They can't have it right then. They are too worked up. And the answer then is to say, you know what? This is a really important topic you're bringing up. I would like to learn more. We don't have time for it right now. Could we talk tomorrow at 10 o'clock at my office? Could I meet you for coffee tomorrow at 2 o'clock or something? A different time. And then watching it so you stay cool and you're careful with the wording you use so you don't flood them. You don't start pushing them where then they get flooded again. So that's really important. Remember, in all this, you're simply trying your best. All these pieces together give you a fighting chance. But you're trying your best in this world, and you don't have any for sure, going to win for sure. Sometime when you're in this, you can get help from a colleague or a manager. Sometimes somebody else can come in the middle of that conversation where you're kind of having a tough time with, or say a resident at the microphone talking about a project, and it's clearly getting to be really worked up, and you're not really doing well. Somebody else can come in and say, could I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm trying to understand this myself. So could you tell me this and this, just to slow it down, divert it over to somebody else, to a different person, a colleague or a manager. I'd like to have a colleague of mine come in if that's okay, because I'm trying to understand this, because you can feel yourself getting worked up and you know that you may not be as effective as you'd like to, then you can get some help. We got a comment here that says, in a perfect world, and if there was enough time, it seems to me meaningful conversations between people with conflicting viewpoints would be best conducted in an informal setting and not an official setting. And there's no doubt about that. That is exactly right. I swear that sometimes when the cameras come on for a public meeting that needs to be recorded, it becomes showtime. And people are going to, whether they're elected officials, unfortunately sometimes, or whether citizens or whoever, everybody starts playing to the camera and being dramatic. And what really needs to happen is just like that conversation we just talked about. Could I sit down with you for a cup of coffee and talk about this a little more, because I'd like to learn a little more. And I know the meeting needs to move on. There's other people that like to talk. So let's have you connect with our administrator, or let's have you and I get together for coffee. And as soon as the meeting's over, please come to me. I'll give you my phone number. We'll set up a time. And then, of course, follow through with that. Because that's a very good point. Another one here is, sometimes what happens is if this is all online, of course, it becomes even more difficult. And so I think it's some of these things for these kind of reframing, it's just that if somebody was sitting at home, a neutral third person was sitting at home watching this on TV, some meeting between you and somebody else arguing about it, how would they feel you did? Were you fair? Did you listen well? Did you treat them well? Because the bottom line is, sooner or later, is that you're trying to do the best you can, you're trying to listen the best you can, and people would say, you know what, that elected official, that manager, that department manager, the clerk, they really did a pretty good job. They were trying to answer questions, they kept their cool, and that's kind of a win in my book. So let's recap. Reframing, the things we just talked about, and there's some excellent resources in the handbook, including some more examples of that affordable housing discussion. So reframing is especially important in public meetings. That there's those 5 steps of reframing, where you're trying to really listen well and everything else, and it really begins with listening and identifying their interests. What is it that's driving them? Okay. Show some empathy. Don't be snarky. Like I say, I've gone down this road myself sometimes where you want to throw some snarky little comment back or something like, oh yeah, like you've never made any mistakes or something like that. Just fight the urge. Try to get to your better angel, your higher self if you can, because it doesn't help when both people start rolling into the gutter. Stay cool. In the middle of all this, try to stay cool and be a pro. The problem-solving process we've been talking about, it kind of fits into this, all we've been through. First off, of course, that you're starting to develop that problem-solving mindset. Go back and look at that traditional and problem-solving approach. You're trying to do that so you can be a little better at engaging in some dialogue, asking some questions, being really genuinely, authentically interested in what they're saying. You're not just trying to blow them off kindly. You're trying to listen to what they're doing. Generate some options, of course, that would be mutually gainful. So everybody gains a little bit, right? And they're out there. It doesn't have to be A or B. There's C and a bunch of other letters, D, E, and F. So there's a whole bunch of things you can do, and don't get pushed into that one or the other. Be creative. Try to think of how you can work through that. Integrating solutions where you're trying to bring some of their stuff in with yours, so I can address some of your financial concerns by bonding for it and spreading it out over 10 years. I can address some financial concerns by putting it off for a couple years until the economy gets better or whatever. Things like that. And then finally, trying to reach an agreement if you can. And I always say this is an agreement that both parties can accept. They don't necessarily love it. I'm not saying they're going to love it, but they're going to be able to accept it. People are adults. Everybody wants their way. We understand that. But in the end, they know there's some give and take here. There's some listening, there's some learning, and you know what? It's going to be, if you can come up with something a little better that includes maybe some of their needs being met, that's a winner. The silver bullet of all this as we go into our sort of summary phase of this presentation is that you should really try, if you can, to get as invested in solving the other person's problem as you are in solving your own, okay? And so, you know that you want to solve your own problem. You got a problem, you need it solved. They got a problem too. That's the beauty of a conflict. Both people have a problem. They see something different and all that. They have different solutions. But if you can try to think about, hey, what could I do to make them feel good about a solution? What would they want to include? If you can get there in your kind of higher self, that's the goal we're looking for. We have one more poll here for everybody. And so we're going to put that up right now. And this is really about public engagement. And so what I'm wondering about is, do you worry about public engagement? Is it becoming more contentious? Public engagement meaning public meetings, hearings. You can answer, yes, I see it happening more and more, or I've seen it a lot, but I haven't seen it a lot, excuse me, but I worry that it will happen. Or no, I really don't see much, and I don't expect it to happen. So at the end of the day, it looks like we're seeing some folks that are worried about public engagement. And that's great, because I got some materials for you and stuff, and we'll move on to that right now. So let's go back over here. We're going to end that poll and go back over to our slides. And we're going to talk just for a minute about public engagement, because I really think that this public engagement tools and things that our office has done is really something fabulous. It's in our handbook and it's on our website, some tremendous tools. So this is a good example. This document, dealing with deeply held concerns. Between this and another document that we have, we've had a lot of really good of questions. Yeah, we did get some people, by the way, responding to our poll that just happened, saying sometimes the wording didn't match, but we're seeing a lot of people saying, I can see it happening more and more, and this is a big issue. And how we handle those public meetings is really the next big test. So on our website, at the Office of Collaboration Dispute Resolution, we have a lot of resources on public engagement. And the truth is that there's a lot to put into it. If you can plan a little bit better, your meeting can turn out better. Now, sometimes I appreciate that it's just a surprise, but if you know it's going to be kind of a tough issue, on our website, we've got a lot of step-by-step things to consider. And the first thing to think about in public meetings like this is, if you know it's coming, who's all being invited? Is it going to be a good group? Do you have enough kind of resources there? When it comes to this thing, do you have materials for the meeting itself? How can you plan and prepare for that meeting? And if people are coming to it and they're concerned about a certain issue, can you identify those issues and then be prepared to answer them? And sometimes what we do a lot in our world is, when you get a room full of people, whether that room includes 20 or 50 or 100, and they're all there, sometimes it's very helpful to break them into small groups of, say, 6 or 8 people around tables. So instead of just, kind of classroom seating, instead they're around some tables, break them into those small groups and have them work through and answer some questions, one of the people talks about public engagement, and in particular, how do you deal with public engagement on things like Facebook? How do you tamp down the Facebook rhetoric? How do you deal with the issues of, like, some places have this thing called Nextdoor, which is this kind of like a Facebook thing where people go into by community, and it seems to me complain about things, but also throw out some good ideas, right? How do you deal with those kind of things? And that's tricky. I know in our cities we have a Facebook site, but a lot of this nasty stuff is not put on the city site, it's put on someplace else. And how do you manage and moderate that? That is a very big issue. And of course, a lot of this is remembering that you want to share as much information as you can. You want to make these public meetings available to folks. I'll give you one good example. We have street projects in our community. We started about 15 years ago. Every other year we do streets. This time around, a couple council member colleagues said, I want to go door to door to every house that's going to be impacted on next year's street project. Was that okay? And I thought to myself, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I don't think that's a good idea. You're going to get people all worked up. And instead I said, of course, to them, I said, you know what? Go for it. They went out, they knocked on doors. The room was full of people to come to the public meetings on the street project, and it didn't work out bad. It worked out great. More people came, got good information about how much it was going to cost and about how long it was going to take and things. They shared that throughout the neighborhood. It became a much better project because of that. So I think that that's great, but we're just going to kind of talk about how you deal with this public engagement and everything else. It's really important. Go to our website. We have a top 10 tips for public engagement. We have documents on how to set up better public meetings. So I think that's really a big issue going forward, and we have a lot of resources. And of course, at the end you'll see my email. So send me an email, and we can talk about it. So what I want to do next is to start our summary up for today. Keep in mind these important points. Number one, even when people are in disagreement, there's often underlying values that are agreed upon. you can't say this good enough. And I said, read the book, Love Your Enemies, your Arthur Brooks, read some of his other books. We are in this polarized time. You would think that we are polar opposites. But the truth is that we all share these underlying values. We want a good government, good local government, one that doesn't cheat and doesn't embezzle and steal. We want people that are responsive. We want information shared. We want our schools to be great for our kids. We want health care that we can get to, whether we're in the middle of a city or in greater Minnesota. We want it accessible. We share a lot of underlying values, and everybody on this particular call shares a commitment to public service and trying to help out. And so when you're in the middle of a disagreement, try to remember that there are some underlying values that you share. That understand that conflict is about the perception of incompatible needs. You just believe it can't be done, it can't get worked out, and it can be. That you need to cultivate a problem-solving mindset, because if you can become joint problem solvers working together that really kind of address some of those most important needs from both sides, you can come up with a better solution. And again, there's going to be some true believers that won't like it, but a lot of people will, and that's what we're aiming for. So we also start from accepting that the other person's story is as true and valid for them as yours is for you. You want to really work hard to understand somebody, not necessarily to agree with. Don't be so afraid that if you learn some information, you're going to fold or cave. Go out, talk to people that disagree with you. Go hang out at a different place, learn new things. This is part of our job. We need to represent the whole community, not just maybe the people that elected us or the people that go to church with us or whatever else. We represent everybody, so try to understand where they're coming from. Again, not that you're going to agree with them, just want to be understanding. To solve a problem, you need to know the interests of the people involved. What do they want to get out of this? And in order to do that, you got to be a good listener. Remembering that people often just want to be heard. They really don't believe that people are listening to them. And so we need to find a way to set up meetings, to set up opportunities for people to be heard. And we want to listen to learn their story. It could be absolutely fascinating. It may not sway the way you vote on some issue, but you want to learn as much as you can. You want to remember those famous 3 words of tell me more. That's really what you want to do. You're always wanting to be learning. And when you do speak, you talk more about yourself, and then you do like blaming the other person and saying, you just don't care, you don't know, you can't relate, you don't have kids, how could you ever relate? You also want to be thinking about using some of these reframing techniques. And again, you go to the handbook, lots of material in there, because some of these issues and statements that people say are just plain nasty and mean, saying you don't care or this or that. And you have to figure out how you're going to respond productively. You just don't want to go down that road of getting into a fight like that. So if you can reframe it, it sounds to me like you're really worried about taxes, or it sounds to me like you're upset about this or that, you know. And then, of course, remember that 5-step model where you're trying to work through these really difficult issues. Okay. Some books to read. First off, these are great, great books. Crucial Conversations. If you're thinking about tough conversations to have with people, the top 2 are really great. In particular, the first one, Crucial Conversations. Getting to Yes and Nonviolent Communication. These are some of the kind of the cores of this whole field of how you have tough conversations and work through tough problems. At the bottom there again is the Office of Collaboration Dispute Resolution website. And so there's a link there, and I'm telling you, we've been working very hard to put up information. And if you don't find what you like, there's my name, Dave Bartholomew. Get a hold of me by email. There's my colleague, Mariah Levison. We would be glad to help. Some of the same questions and concerns you have might develop some new information, a new training that we can share not only with you, but your colleagues all across the state. So I'd like to thank you at this point for all of your comments and questions. We very much appreciate it. This is being taped with a goal of putting up there on our website within the next couple weeks, so keep an eye on that, and maybe we'll be able to reach out to you also. So we're planning on putting this up so you can review it again, your colleagues can review it. You have the handbook, of course. And we had a comment come in at the end about dividing and conquering within councils, and that is true. Sometimes you need to have a planning session, some sort of strategy session to get down and make sure you understand how you're going to work together as a team. It's a lot about trust, a lot about team building. So with that, I'm going to let you go. I want to say thank you very much again for attending today, for all your questions and comments, and perhaps most important, thank you for what you're doing. Your hard work on behalf of your citizens, cities, counties, townships, school boards, other organizations, is very much appreciated in these tough times. So thanks for all the work you do, and please continue to learn and grow and get a hold of us if we can help you in any way. Thank you very much.